There's a lot of excitement and a lot of hype related to the creation of content using these new modern tools, the production, the editing. So the general, text to video or text to PowerPoint decks, whatever it might be. So the creation aspect, I think, is really, really fascinating. To answer your question more specifically, the thing that I think is really, really helpful to the industry and equally fascinating is what's happening behind the scenes.
Hi everyone, my name is Dominik. I'm the CEO and founder of Cornerstone, and I'm the host for today's podcast episode with our guest, Marc Ramos, who's been a learning leader for the past 20 years, leading organizations such as Google's learning program, worked in Novartis, basically spearheading their innovative initiatives, and also was Chief Learning Officer of Cornerstone. And eventually today, we are going to talk about his experience with how AI-first learning systems are changing the way we learn, changing the way we consume materials. And we are going to talk about also what's the definition of a course today. It's great to have you here, Marc, in our studio in London. You just flew in, so appreciate the opportunity. And we've known each other for a while, right? And I always wanted to sort of have this session and talk about something truly innovative, something fun. So yeah, it's a pleasure having you here.
Great pleasure to be here, Dominik. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Could you as a sort of introduction mention a few bits of your excitement about the space? I know that you're attending many conferences, many webinars, many events these days. What are some of the sort of innovations you see that kind of fascinate you, or where the field is moving? I wanted to start with that sort of as an introduction.
Yeah, that's a great question. It might help the audience in the sense of I've been doing this corporate learning arrangement for well over 20 years. In fact, I actually come from a family of educators. I'm only saying that in the sense that things are so significantly changing, and I think so much for the better of learners, the better for learning, and the better for learning and development teams. Clearly, there's a big set of incredible changes related to artificial intelligence and so forth, and all of its siblings, large language models, the agentic or agents and so forth. So those are obvious big trends. I think what's really interesting is there's a lot of excitement and a lot of hype related to the creation of content using these new modern tools, the production, the editing. So the general, text to video or text to PowerPoint decks, whatever it might be. So the creation aspect, I think, is really, really fascinating. To answer your question more specifically, the thing that I think is really, really helpful to the industry and equally fascinating, it's what's happening behind the scenes. The metaphor that I tend to use, whether it's a good metaphor or not, I actually was raised in restaurants and had to pay my way through school as a server, a food server, a waiter. And I'm only saying that in the sense of the way that I think about some of these modern approaches to learning. There's the stuff that happens in the dining room, using this restaurant metaphor, and that's the user experience or the learner experience or the customer experience. So how is AI in its many forms and fashions supporting that? The thing that I think is really interesting, though, is what's happening in the kitchen, what's happening behind the scenes, the operational pieces, the advances towards better administration and so forth. So it's a long-winded answer, but there's a lot of great things going on, and I'm equally excited in terms of what's happening in the dining room, so to speak. Yeah. That's less learner-facing, as well as what's happening to the chefs behind the scenes that are building the recipes and looking for the best ingredients.
Yeah, that's such a fantastic metaphor. Makes really easy to understand. By the way, my parents are also coming from a teaching background, so really? it's a great connection there. And I also understand how large of an impact these technologies have on learning. What I'm seeing is some of the previous technological unlocks did not affect the field so much, or kind of L&D practitioners, the industry itself they weren't such a big pioneers in this. Yet now, kind of what I see is learning experts are pioneering the usage of AI, finding the most innovative use cases first, other than like other professionals. Do you see the same thing? Do you think with AI, like this field particularly is kind of spearheading this innovation quite well, or kind of how are you observing that?
Yeah, I have a very, very myopic, very self-interested and self-interest type of response in the sense of I think the folks that are doing more modern forms of creation, it's typically in the corporate setting, it's marketing, and it's also L&D, learning and development. I think there's some really interesting advances that have happened since ChatGPT 3.5 came out a couple years ago, a little more than a couple years ago. And so with that in mind, my perspective, my very narrow perspective to a degree is those folks that are really advancing better creation, better production of a variety of different assets, they're kind of on the cutting edge, to your point. And thinking about it from a learning and development perspective, particularly as a leader in this space, I think that L&D in particular has a responsibility to help promote and drive better adoption of AI for all the other components of a corporation. I think selfishly that the learning and development function in particular, if we are that upstream entity that is testing, exploring, discovering new methods, and assuming that it's working, if we are truly that upstream on provisioning this, then finding new aspects, new ways to kind of deploy content and other things, then I think we have a responsibility to help other parts of the company, the folks downstream or sidestream, so to speak. I wrote an article some time ago, has kind of a really corny name, that L&D is the new R&D. Learning and development is the new research and development. And I'm only framing that in the sense of, as I mentioned, I think we have a responsibility because we're doing a lot of research and development in the AI creation space. And then we also have that obvious opportunity to really drive and increase better skills and skilling for folks downstream or sidestream to use these AI tools. So there's a lot of really great innovation. And I do think the folks that are on, again, the production side, the creation side, I think you do have a responsibility to give back.
Yeah, that's very clear, and also like I see the same trends that due to these innovative efforts, like there are like real like R&D like initiatives going on as well in various teams at all sides of companies. And what like do I see it correctly as well? The sense that people are more focused on the dining room experience rather than the kitchen in this case. Like, do you have the same view? Like, I think, when we talked last time, you mentioned that, companies normally try to enable their learning experience just via applying an AI process into this whole like restaurant metaphor. But rather than that, it would need to be rebuilt from its foundations using AI to truly build an AI-first learning system. What's your perspective on that? Like, do you see also like wrong implementations via not shaking the foundations enough time to time? I would say I would be quite curious to hear your perspective there.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very topical question because I think a lot of talent teams, HR teams, and L&D teams are trying to think that through. I mean, the choice of the words, the word foundation is really interesting, in the sense that what are our core foundational attributes for learning or learners, and is AI playing there? To kind of reframe the question a little bit. I mean, for me, some of the core tenets, the core attributes of really solid learning. There's this thing called practice. There's this thing called retention. There's this thing called learning with others. There are so many other kind of foundational components, but just using those three as an example, is AI playing there? Is AI playing in such a way where it's really helping to find and foster new ways for learners to practice in more profound, different, or deeper ways? Is AI helping learners and learning from a retention standpoint? Is AI so just focused on, Mark's engagement with a online class, and I'm looking at my laptop, and so my relationship is me and the rectangle, for lack of better words. And is there an AI play there? Absolutely. But is that really increasing my ability to learn with others? And others is becoming that much more, I don't know, challenging or debatable in the sense of others are also going to be agents. Am I going to learn? Am I going to practice? Am I going to retain? And am I going to learn better with an agent in comparison with a fellow human? What does that augmentation kind of look like? Which is going to be really, really interesting. But I don't know if anybody's really dropping the ball or doing the wrong things. In the spirit of just exploration and testing and experimentation, I think it's so critical that that so many folks, whether you're a worker or whether you're just hanging out at home, working or not, you need to explore, you need to trial, you need to test. I'm sometimes asked, so how do I get into this AI stuff? It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
Go to OpenAI, go to Perplexity, go to Claude, go to Google. There's so many free options. Just go in and just start playing around, and you'll have a much better understanding of the importance of asking good questions or more sophisticated prompting and so forth. But that's a really, really good, really, really good question, Dominik. I think the foundation piece is something that I tend to think that it's getting lost sometimes, and I think a lot of folks are more or less focused on the shine, for lack of better words.
The way you phrased it to me is that if certain leaders or even like individuals had a better understanding of how the back end of our operations of such systems work, they would be able to utilize it better. They would be able to find ROI even higher. So my question is like, how does like truly like an AI first learning system differ in terms of its back-end operation versus like a more traditional one? Based on my understanding, we are talking about a lot more dynamic experience that really feeds from the data and the personalized sort of inputs from the user, from the learner. Could you walk us through like how you kind of differentiate the two, or what your experience is over the years? How is it developing, right?
Yeah, the word choice of AI first is really, really compelling because it has such a strong message to it. I think it's interesting also to be sensitive to word choices when we're talking about AI. I personally tend not to think so much about, technology first, anything, whether it's, code first or programming first or AI first, just to be very candid. I think the first is it's people. I think the first is humans. I think sometimes there's just a lot of, when you look at the spectrum of where are we today with all the AI fascination. On one side, there is a lot of the hype, and on the other side, there's maybe the scary reality. So where are we in the middle? So it's a really, really good question. The way I kind of think about being more AI centric is one where, I think there's definitely been a lot of changes over the past few years. I love how you're kind of framing the question too, Dominik, in the sense of more or less in the kitchen, right? So the creation piece and the experience piece in particular related to what happens in the dining room, getting back to the metaphor, I think it's getting a lot of really good attention. But to your point, you mentioned return on investment, the ROI. I think when we're looking at the activities that happens behind the scenes for instructional designers, for L&D program and project managers, and obviously the leadership in that regard, we're in really interesting times in our society, particularly related to all the macroeconomics and budgets being cut, and unfortunately a lot of folks being let go. So you need to show that ROI. You need to show that return. You need to show impact. You need to show value. And there are ways where I think AI is clearly providing that now in the kitchen, for lack of better words, behind the scenes. If you're able to produce something at twice the speed or maybe half the cost, there's clearly ROI against that. if you're able to now look at a wide array of learning data or learner data, and you haven't been able to look at that data and extract out the real insights that are going to benefit the business, we can do that now. So I think the ROI there, whether it's data specific or production specific or distribution specific, that's definitely getting a lot more sophisticated, and rightfully so. So that's a good thing, I think, for the industry.
And what are the most common because I think it can still be misinterpreted how we define AI first, as you phrase it. So what are some of the most common misconceptions that you come across? Because for most organizations, it still might not mean the same. So what's truly AI first? What makes something truly AI first in your mind, practically?
Yeah, I think setting aside kind of the semantics, for lack of better words, so AI first, I think, has a really interesting connotation in the sense of we need to think about value first. We need to think about speed first. We need to think about better uses of technology to be competitive first. So that's how I would kind of frame kind of an AI first perspective. Clearly, the humanity and the humans are still part of the equation, but framing it in terms of, well, we need to think about leveraging these new technologies in better, smarter ways. That is certainly an AI first approach, and I think that's very shrewd and very smart and very necessary. The other aspect that I was looking at in terms of, and again, this is a little bit of semantics for the audience, in the sense of what's AI centric. I think AI centric is, at least for me, one where you're not so absolutely fascinated about the technology, even though it's growing and it's awesome and it's maturing. I think you're also, again, equally fascinated on how is this affecting humans? How are we providing different, forms of learner engagement, of learner excitement? Thinking about the learner first. Maybe it's a learner first in a AI centric world. I don't know, but that's a really, really good question. And again, I think there's just a lot of really great progress that's happening just broadly, and not just for those large companies that have large L&D teams. I love the fact that there are smaller sized L&D teams, or maybe it's just one person or maybe a couple folks, but now they are discovering new ways to scale with greater efficiencies and greater efficacy, the same caliber and quality of stuff that a really large learning and development team might produce. So I think that's also very fascinating as well. It's just, how do we right size the right capabilities and the right time and the right team to get the equally awesome stuff out.
And can we imagine that in the kitchen, this operation is fully agentic, meaning that the AI system itself curates, creates, and even validates whether a specific even learning material is needed for a segment of the audience, or today you would still classify something as AI first when it's not even fully agentic, but sort of semi-automated or requires manual processes. How do you differentiate those two bits? Because for this agentic revolution or evolution happening these days.
Yeah, that's another great question. I think so one view of that, I don't know if this is good, bad, right, or wrong, but one view that I would have is there's differences between, an AI agentic approach and a non-AI, non-agentic approach. And it's more than just semantics. I think when we're talking about these modern views of how AI agents can be playing with the workforce or with learners and so forth, typically the very, very simple definition is the agent working on their own in a very autonomous way where they're given specific instructions in terms of how to do a specific task. But the way that the agent would operate is they can adapt to situations. They have different forms of reasoning where they can provide and gather their own rationale in terms of what's the best decisions, what's the best next steps, and so forth. So that highly autonomous form of AI, the more agentic piece. And then there's the more non-agentic, for lack of better words, that's a lot more rules-based in the sense of, let's just say that you're a course developer and you want to take this the standard operating procedure PDF that's 50 pages of X, and you want to run it through AI. So AI is going to transform that into more digestible slides, just for lack of better words. For me, I consider that more rules-based in the sense that you're giving this form of AI a very specific set of rules that says, look at do optical character recognition, look at the text, chunk the text into certain sizes. And by the way, the size is going to be stuff that's going to fit on slides, and make sure that if the standard operating procedure, the SOP, has a certain flow, then mimic the flow. But at the same time, with some level of reasoning, just focus on the things that are super concrete to a specific job or role or set of tasks and so forth. I consider that a lot more non-agentic. It's not as if that translation from the 50-page PDF to 15 slides, that it has to be like absolutely creative. It's just following specific instructions. So I think that's a really interesting distinction, at least in my opinion. And I'd love to talk about too the forward part of your question about how I think agents and non-agentic approaches are actually going to radically change what we currently call a course these days, a training program. So that's another really, really great opportunity.
So how is this going to change the way we consume or way we look at the definition of content, of courses, learning management systems, learning experience platforms? There's I assume, quite a large change coming with this direction, and we see movements in the industry as well. How are you seeing that? What timelines do you even predict there, in terms of this change and these next milestones?
Good question. Particularly the timelines piece.
Everyone's interested in timelines all the time.
Oh, I know. But the thing is, this animal called AI. It's this thing is moving so quickly.
Exactly.
And in unpredictable ways, good, bad, right, or wrong. So it's a really great question in the sense of, how are programs, courses going to change? How is the distribution models, whether it's a learning management system or a learning experience platform, LMS and LXP, how that's going to change? I kind of look at it from this perspective, and I wrote an article about this that also has another kind of interesting, crazy name. And the name of the article is Let Learning Breathe. And the whole concept here is, traditionally for the past 10, 100, thousands of years, when you want to experience a learning course, for lack of better words, it's usually something that has a certain title, has a certain set of goals. It may be for a certain role, at least from a workforce development perspective. And that's all great. My point is, what's interesting is when you look at a course, whether it's an academic course or corporate course, for the most part, it's in a container. It is bound by duration. Here's my 20-minute video-based course. Here's my 2-hour course. Here's my 20-day series. It's bound by a duration. I think the other thing too is it's typically bound by a fixed set of use cases or scenarios or objectives or goals. And then it might be, again, specific to a certain persona or a certain group or a certain role or function. I think what's happening now is with large language models and this thing called knowledge graphs and so forth, when you look at all the data, all the raw data, many folks call it the unstructured data within a company, it's massive. And is there a way for AI to actually identify all those unstructured chunks of information, to identify what's going to be the most useful for the company or for individuals or for a certain function or a certain need, such as attaining a sales quota in Australia because they're rolling out a new Australian product or something? What's happening, I think, now is as AI is getting smarter and smarter, it's going to identify those individual assets within the enterprise, it's going to correlate or use the right kind of reasoning to determine its value, its relevance, its importance. Is it accurate to a certain need? And I think the fun part, or at least the exciting part, is once it does identify those individual assets, even though they might be unstructured, meaning it's just from this third paragraph of some expert's email, or it's just from this really quick video snippet of somebody talking about this very, obscure but important thing, or it's just in this very, very unique set of code that nobody actually looked at just that set of code and said, that is really remarkable stuff. So it's not really structured, but it's there and very valuable. If AI can identify these really awesome items, these assets as I call them, restructure them for a specific need, just to help the sales team in Australia focus on this really unique value proposition that the company's never experienced before, but this one expert in New Zealand really kind of figured it out and put together this slide deck or something. If AI is able to identify those nuggets, to categorize those nuggets, to tag those nuggets with the right metadata tags, so that way we know what the value of that item might be if we want to use it for different needs, and then redistribute that and rebundle that and repackage that for individuals, for my personal needs compared to your individual needs and so forth, and adapt those chunks in such a way, getting back to let learning breathe, we are now removing the boundaries. We are now removing time constrictions. We're now allowing AI to not only identify the unique stuff for Dominik or for Mark or for Jane or Judy and whoever, but if it can do it dynamically in real time, that's going to be the fantastic future, and I think it's the near future. And then for the learning management systems and the learning experience platforms and other kind of technologies, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know how they're going to respond.
Do you see new platforms emerging using these logic and these technologies, or all the existing platforms we have to adapt to this because it's such a superior way of handling learning?
Yeah, I think the adoption is happening big time in the industry right now. When you're looking at pretty much all of the really big learning management system players, and I know the LXP or the learning experience platforms are kind of going away to a certain degree. I think the functionality is just being now absorbed into a learning management system or whatever it might be called in the future. I think that's the smart folks are really starting to figure it out and really starting to add more AI first or AI centric functionality into their platform, which I think is great. And I think the competition in that regard is also very, very healthy. But how quickly can they make those changes is interesting. I think for a lot of companies that are very, very customer first or customer centric focused, how are they really, really working very closely with their customer base to understand their business needs and then fold those business needs from their customers back into their functionality. So if you have a specific need related to using AI to better map this specific chunk of content to that specific skill with that level of proficiency, beginner level to advanced, if it kind of can do that, then I think it opens up a whole new opportunity in terms of a lot of existing content that already exists within the enterprise or maybe from a provider, in the sense of now we can have a lot more targeted understanding of how that content is going to support that specific skill at that specific proficiency level. And there's so much more beyond that. So it's a different ballgame.
And what are the most important sort of these back-end operations? Because to me, it just sounds like the centralizing this data or gathering this data is just so vital to provide like a high-quality learning experience. So should you want to start implementing something like this, would you start there first, or like what are the almost inevitable parts that you have to establish, as an organization, as a team, if you want to move towards this direction?
Great question. AI runs on data, and that's its fuel. And if you can figure out a way to massage, manage, manipulate the data to benefit XYZ business cause, that's clearly a big deal. Um, the the other thing that I think is really interesting too is traditionally, by that I mean just in the past 10 years, a lot of companies, particularly very large, multinational companies, they want all their data in one place. Call it like the ultimate data lake or whatever the construct might be. And that clearly makes a lot of sense. What's really interesting is I don't know if there's a radical change from centralized data. I think there's more interesting experimentation related to within this lake or like these ponds of very unique data sets. And a pond, for lack of better examples, could be something that's just specific to your go-to-market strategy. But you want to make sure that your go-to-market strategy in this unified lake is also tied to the HR team's hiring strategy, which is also tied to the learning team's ability to build the right content for the right skills. If you're a manufacturing company, you want to make sure that your go-to-market pond, for lack of better examples, is also tied to your ERP systems and your manufacturing technologies and platforms. Now, all of this is in one big data lake, but I think what's happening now is, particularly with the use of agents, of AI agents, where they're very task specific. They do this specific chunk of the workflow related to this part of the marketing team's go-to-market strategy. So that's very targeted within this large data lake, central entity, but it's really, really unique towards a specific task or outcome. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot more of these very task-specific agents that are doing just a unique workflow. They're just helping the marketing team position the right content and the right value prop messaging for financial services in Japan or something. They're getting very, very specific. And that's very targeted within this big lake of data, this big centralized thing. So I think it's having this, I don't know if it's a hybrid. I think it's just more or less the next phase of just getting a lot more targeted. But my point here is when you identify the right agents that do certain workflows, certain tasks, I gave the marketing one as an example, you still need to leverage not only the data within, for lack of better words, the go-to-market pond in the data lake, but you need to be able to identify other agents that are working in other ponds, the sales pond, the talent pond, the manufacturing pond, within this large data lake. So maybe not the best metaphor in the world, but I do think that this unique appeal related to what agents are doing outside of just the talent and learning area, it's just super fascinating.
Yeah. It's I still love the metaphors. We can keep them for sure. Helps a lot to explain.
That's the challenge.
Exactly. Overall speaking, I really want to talk a bit about the implementation side, because I assume no one fully implemented such learning systems perfectly. This is we are in a progression state now where everyone is trying. So where could you really begin the journey as a given employee at a larger company, and if you really want to test or kind of even validate the concept of such a innovation, and as you said, quantify the return on investment as well. Are there any ways you can establish such a system at a smaller scale, prove its value, showcase more regarding how it can either bring revenue or reduce costs for the business?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question, because I think it's so loud and appropriate in terms of just the things I'm seeing in the industry. By that I mean, to what degree do we allow, autonomous humans to identify great value and use of AI for the company? Where do you start? The number one place where you start is clearly understanding what is my company's guidelines related to AI governance, the ethics piece, the right use of the right tools piece, and then most important, clearly important, It's the data piece, right? You don't want any confidential or unique data, either from the company or personal data, to be absorbed by a large language model that's not really authorized by the company. Anyway, point number one is identify within the company what are the guidelines that I need to be aware and ideally follow, or absolutely follow, because it's important to the security and the safety and the success of the company. So that's one thing. When you find out what those policies or guidelines are, start playing around. Let's just make an example. Let's just say that you're a Microsoft shop, Microsoft customer, and you have different forms of Azure in terms of how you're actually provisioning and using certain technologies. Well, play around with Microsoft Copilot as much as you can. Try to build something that you've never done before because you never thought you were an expert, but actually, I never thought I was creative. I never thought I was a good artist. Well, actually use some of these tools to be creative, to draw something, for lack of better words, where you never thought that you actually had drawing skills. Well, you can now. So I think it's so great because it's providing new opportunities to challenge people, I think, in the right ways. I'm just using artistry or your ability to take something that was a pencil diagram and make it something really, really colorful and 3D or whatever it might be. So experiment within the guidelines of the company. But more than that, challenge yourself in ways where, if you never thought that you were awesome with, molecular science, well, try something, see what happens. Experiment with something with a molecular science article or something, and just maybe reinterpret it in terms of what would this look like if it was an animal, right? That's a really crazy notion, but there's a lot of really cool things you can be doing with large language models and other forms of AI these days. But play around and also just challenge yourself. The last thing I'd say too is, if it's within the guidelines of your company, or let's just say that you're not employed and there's no guidelines for the Marc Ramos house, right? I'm just playing around. Then one thing that may be helpful is to have more than one large language model open at a time, at the same time. Again, make sure that you're working in the right environment, that it's safe, and you're very, very, obviously concerned about your personal data. But my point is, if you have, Gemini and Claude and ChatGPT open at the same time, one way to experiment and challenge yourself and be creative is ask the same question, the same prompt to all three, and just see what happens. I think it's fascinating. It's almost as if you're talking to three different experts, but they're all experts in the same field. But one might return something just very structured and just very to the point. Then the other one might come back and say, well, you know what? Let me tell you a little story here. And another one could come back with, that wasn't specific enough. Give me a better prompt. Give me better instructions. I'm kind of making this up, but for those folks that have been playing with different large language models, you know what I mean? It's the response in itself and its thinking, its reasoning, its rationale to support your question. In many cases, it's exactly the same, in almost word by word.
Yeah.
In other cases, based on the complexity or the uniqueness of your questioning, your prompt, it can come at you in radically different ways. The ones that I think are just exciting for young folks, for folks that are just getting started on this stuff, if you're really into, the fascination of good questioning, of asking good prompts, one really good tool or device or method is, ask your large language model to play a certain character. This is very, very common in, I think, really good prompting. Play the role of an architect, or play the role of Walt Disney, or, look at it from an alien just visiting Earth for the first time. So, and then see how it responds. Because sometimes you're going to get stuff that's totally, totally creative. Sometimes you're going to get stuff where it did so much research related to how Walt Disney thought about, I don't know, the color of pink, whatever it might be. And it might find something like that, and it's going to add that in its response. So it's an incredibly great vehicle to really not only challenge you, but to also drive and enhance that next level of curiosity, because it's going to give you stuff that you can't even imagine. Maybe you might, given some time. But I think that's just a fantastic way to kind of experiment, to your point, in terms of where someone could get started.
And when you mentioned that understanding the back-end operations of such a learning system, you meant exactly these parts, right? So how these LLMs kind of operate, how they kind of base their questions, and maybe that can influence your decision-making process around the, let's say, data investments or navigating between different systems. Is it a correct interpretation there?
Regarding the impact from an operational standpoint?
Exactly. By understanding the back-end operations, yes.
Yeah.
Is that the best approach you can take, like playing around with the LLMs and using all these examples you mentioned, or are there any other things you can do?
Yeah, I think just addressing folks that are listening in from L&D, from an L&D perspective, the back-end systems and so forth. And if that's the first place to start or a good place to start, I think absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I think about it, it still needs to be very human first and human centric. So maybe a good place to start, and it might be more complicated, and it might take more time. Think about personas. Think about learning journeys. Think about the typical pathway that someone who wants to be a stellar in data science, but they have zero background. So what is their path, their journey, starting off as a beginner to a proficient expert thought leader? And how are they going to get there? Well, they might get there from formal training. They might get there by going back to school and getting a master's or a PhD. They might get it from being mentored by awesome data scientists. They can go to a third-party source and get a certification and so forth. My point is, the human learner has a lot of different choices in terms of how to attain their goal or their career aspiration. If you frame it from the human's perspective first, and then think about what's the AI first and AI-centric approach, whether it's back-end or front-end or whatever it might be, that's the way that I'd kind of look at it. I think it's a more, for lack of better words, a more humane way. But I think it's also just very practical, because you're going to have a lot more confidence in someone's journey, I think, than how to slap on the right technology, which I think is happening a lot now. I think folks that are focusing on, even on within L&D teams or HR teams and the legal teams, where they're doing all this back-end, behind-the-scenes work, valuable work, critical work, I think sometimes they get a little distracted in terms of, well, AI is going to be able to do all this and this for me, when there's still this aspect of hallucination. So is the response from AI either an answer or the actual output of work? Is it still correct? It might sound relevant, but is it really, really accurate? And I think we're at a point where we still need to figure that out. So the answer is that there's a lot of kind of ways to kind of look at this. I kind of think about the human first approach. But then again, as I mentioned beforehand, we're dealing in some really interesting times where, companies are cutting back on their budgets, and they're making difficult choices about, their people, either from a hiring perspective or a retention perspective. And so, the folks that are kind of owning the wallet for the company, they're saying, you know what, we don't have a choice. We need to think about the back end costs, because it's a matter of survival or being competitive. So where do you draw the line between the human side and then the business rationale side? It's interesting.
How should learning leaders quantify the ROI better, or what metrics or KPIs should one even track to ensure that it won't just, it will help to even unlock more budget because the company sees the true return on investment on these projects?
Yeah, there's two lenses there. One is you need to have, ideally, some sort of existing data to reference and to map the future state using AI data against. So in other words, if you don't have any legacy data, some historical data on how many hours of consumption are you receiving for a certain type of course, or just the learning hours in general. If you don't have some data in the past, then you'll have a hard time doing any kind of comparison. So my point here is, when you're thinking about where to start, whether you're talking just within your own learning team or talent team, or you're talking to a C-level that really, really wants to identify across the board, where am I not receiving impact from whichever team, make sure you're starting off in such a way where you can tell a strong story in a way that you have existing data to pull from. And for a lot of the learning teams that have even reasonable data points, it's still, ideally, you're still able to track consumption. You're still able to track, how many consumption in the sense of hours. It could be consumption also related to courses. It could be consumption related to a program. It could be consumption related to a certain job family, right? Sales folks, they are consuming XYZ type of content differently than others, whatever that might be. My point is, consumption, or the total number of learning hours, is something that a lot of teams track. And then there's the other stuff. There's evaluation scores. There's the cost of, there's ratios that you can consider that ideally a lot of teams have. Ratios in the sense of, I know to produce a 4-minute video-based course, really quick kind of mini lesson on something. Generally speaking, it takes 6 hours, and when you look at the labor cost on average for that 6 hours across the board, or I mean by that, and obviously you want to anonymize the individuals, but if it costs X number of dollars, or name your currency, to produce that 4-minute thing, then you just do the math and you can figure it out from there. But my major point is, identify the current data and the current data structure that you have, and then map that against the ideal state or the change state related to how AI can provision stuff or build stuff faster. And the other side of your question too, related to how to then influence these other folks, whether they're the chief financial officer or whatever. The way I kind of look at it, and I could be totally wrong, is in many cases, these folks don't also understand what the heck is the AI opportunity. They don't really understand that, it's all about maybe risk or compliance, and therefore they don't want to kind of go down there. So you have to keep in mind that even very, very senior folks, in many cases, they don't know as much as you probably know already. But not to make fun of the executives, but sometimes, they're never going to admit that. But just assume that you have a responsibility to help guide them and teach them, and try to figure that out. Then the last thing, obviously, is use their language, use their structure, their expectations. If the CFO, for lack of better words, is all about OpEx, operational costs related to labor, then try to position your learning data or the learning opportunity using great creation tools that's going to offset the overall cost of labor. So try to frame things from their perspective.
Yeah, it's truly logical. Like, I can fully relate to it. Like, given the amounts of conversations some of our audience members or even customers had with their teams, primarily in this economic era, as you mentioned. I think it's absolutely. I can echo that. It's absolutely important to present it from their perspective and sort of kind of personalize the message accordingly. Like, in terms of the innovation, like how fast is this picking up eventually? Like, what I've seen is basically like these AI first systems have started to be built out like in the last year or so, like 1.5 years ago, right? And companies starting to understand this more and more. Like, do you see like we will change the way we learn and we consume content, or even the definition of content will change so fast in a year's time, or is it moving that fast based on what you see in the industry, like across the companies you work at, or how fast is this like coming together in the final pieces?
Too fast.
Too fast.
too fast. It's so too fast, I think, for a lot of folks to understand how to respond, to understand if this new thing that just happened in the last 2 weeks, is it real? Because there's still a lot of, competition going on with a lot of these AI players, and they're, of course, trying to work it, right? So you have to kind of read between the lines in terms of what's really going on, do your research and so forth, see what their competition's doing. That's one way to kind of consider it. I think it's a tough dilemma, though. The one thing that I would ideally recommend is, I hate to say it this way, but kind of start slow. So start with something that you have a for sure use case or business problem to solve. Don't get distracted with all the new stuff. So, a mainstay is, a lot of these what's called frontier large language models. Again, Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, and so forth. So double down or triple down on just what they can do, and maybe some of their subsets. All of these big players, they have, different types of video production aspects and different forms of content and so forth, or helping coders, right? Or helping a non-coder code their own website, for example. My point is start with something that you're already familiar with and just try to double down and experiment in that domain. Try not to be distracted by all this cool stuff, which is still kind of shiny for whatever reason. Hasn't been thoroughly tested or explored, but it's right out the door because this frontier company, they're highly competitive. So heck yeah, I'm going to get it out. And this might not work for some folks where, no, I want to be on the cutting edge.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make sure that I block, every Friday afternoon to double down on whatever happened that week on really cool stuff, shiny or not. If that's your gig, then go for it. I think it's as long as you know that you still need to have the right due diligence to see if it's going to benefit the company. In other words, a second or third or fourth party to experiment with you, making sure that there's some sort of evidence, concrete evidence that the gain is going to be helpful for the company. I think that stuff is still very rational, very shrewd, and I think very smart in terms of whether you're going to just play in the known sandbox or, oh no, I'm building my own sandbox every Friday afternoon. They both work. Just be very, very, I think, cognizant of what's going to be the best value, the best evidence back to the company to make sure that, again, you're providing that impact on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very valuable. And given all these data requirements and like the technical aspects you mentioned, like how does this change the L&D team's sort of structure and collaboration with IT teams specifically? Like, is there like a more closer and tight collaboration required given these AI advancements and the architecture of these systems? How do you see that kind of transforming?
I think it's transforming big time. It's interesting. A lot of learning teams are typically housed within HR, human resources, or talent, typically. And what I see is a really interesting trend. It's not a fad, it's a trend. It's actually happening. Is I think a lot of L&D teams are actually getting closer to IT and engineering than within their own kind of HR family. This is just an observation. I could be 1,000% wrong. But my point is, yeah, I think they're getting a lot closer. Mm-hmm. They're getting a lot closer, particularly on an AI front, because the IT team, the CIO, the CTO, et cetera, they also are trying to identify the right type of value points with AI. And in many cases, stuff's moving so quickly, the more commonly interested parties can help experiment and test with you, then you're probably going to come to some sort of concrete resolution a lot faster. And I'm just starting to see a lot more of this collaboration happening, with the marketing team and the tech team. or the learning team and the IT team. I'm starting to see that a lot, and I think that's really, really healthy. And it's more than just building the right, engineering skills, which is very important. But experimenting together and testing together and challenging each other more formidably to ideally increase or improve the consumer experience or the learner experience. I think that's just awesome. And if anything, too, getting back to, budget constraints and so forth, if you can start to combine or harmonize your labor dollars and your budgeting for the same type of output or a similar output, I think that's also very, very smart as well.
Yeah, makes sense. And turning to some of the takeaways from these concepts and session, like, can you like formulate like again, like if you're in the shoe of a learning leader, or even like a professional trying to innovate their organizational like investments and innovation towards an AI first learning system, then based on my understanding the backend principles and the technical kind of constraints of how AI works eventually is the number one place to start. And of course, getting at least a data pound in order, not even the entire data lake, but just a pound where it relates to
the stream.
Exactly, it relates to the relevant use case that you want to solve, that you want to trial. And given you do that, you would have a much better understanding of the ROI. You would be able to showcase how it works and understand its constraints. Is that sort of the takeaway in your mind, or is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Can you rephrase the question?
Yes, of course. So basically, like the takeaway for today is the fact that if you really want to build out such a system or build towards such a system, you really need to understand the kitchen first and understand like how AI operates on a principal level. Plus, also invest into the right operations on the data side and establish this source of information, at least for the use case we are trying to solve. Is it a correct interpretation of the main takeaway from the story?
I think so. I think a key element or a key takeaway, particularly from this wonderful discussion, is if you think there's gonna be value in any of these AI constructs, products, solutions, you got to go in there and given the right guidelines from the company that you're working with, experiment like crazy. What I'm starting to see is I'm starting to see a lot more value and impact gained related to the L&D teams becoming a lot more operationally efficient in the kitchen. I think the benefits and the value and the level of creation on the learner experience side, seeing really great, animations or graphics that never existed before, or just right sizing just that right chunk or chunks of content for that particular Dominik need, right? Those kind of learner experience things, I think they're definitely getting a lot more advanced and a lot more concrete in the sense of providing real relevant value. That said, the back office, the kitchen, the new recipes, the new forms of pots and pans, for lack of better metaphors, that are being used, the tools essentially. That's the real fascinating part for me, because oftentimes that's the non-sexy work, for lack of better words. It's the work that people just don't often see. But not to push the restaurant metaphor so much, but when you go into a great restaurant, name your favorite restaurant, and you always get that one dish because it's always so consistently phenomenal, you kind of, at some point, tend to think less about what was the actual recipe or who actually cooked this or blah, blah, blah. You might. But at some point, you just love the fact that you're having this incredibly thrilling opportunity with this one particular dining room event, the dish in this case. Same thing for a course. My point is that I think there's not enough love given to those folks in the back office and in the kitchen. And that love now, I think, is being far more admired and expressed because of the value of using new AI tools or agentic tools to build better recipes, to identify new forms of ingredients, to let learning breathe, as I mentioned beforehand, in the sense of you're now able to work with agents or non-agentic AI approaches to identify new forms of instruction that might have existed in the past, but it just took very, very manual or long, lengthy efforts to make that unique chunk just specific for you.
Yeah, it's such an exciting time overall. Like I firmly believe in like how this will bring value. Like it's quite logical. The implementation is still hard, and that's why we wanted to like ensure we can bring certain perspectives of the whole field for our audience. But thank you so much for sharing all that. I think we'll be ready to ask some quick questions I've prepared. So we can pause here and just you can take the time. I just prepared a list of questions. Just
these are like surprise Dominik questions?
Exactly. Unrelated to the area.
Let's go. Let's
Exactly.
bring it on. What's my favorite color? If I had any kind of pizza to choose, what would be the topping? Okay, go for it.
Where were you when ChatGPT was released and stuff like that?
Oh
No.
my
It's a bit more related to the topic still, but not directly.
Okay.
As mentioned, Mark, like let's turn to a few quick questions I prepared for you. Many companies talk about being people first, but a few pull it off. Like, how do you operationalize that value and leadership and culture to become a truly people first organization?
Good question. The first thing to come to mind is clearly understanding what are those cultural attributes of the company. Does the company truly believe in fairness? Does it truly believe in respect? Does it truly believe in empathy? Does it truly believe in kindness? Now, that might not be the corporate language, so to speak, but it's those attributes that I think are just very people-centric, people-first. And there's a lot of companies that celebrate those type of human and humane attributes. A company that I worked for many years, they had this really, really strong cultural attribute regarding the power of curiosity. They also had a really great cultural attribute related to unleashing the power of our people. Now, to what degree do either one of these like very, business, high margin, high profit oriented? Oh, this is curiosity is going to drop top line. It's going to drive our top line success. I don't know, but those, to your point, those are really, I think, the lasting, durable, non-perishable aspects of any successful company. We're still thinking about those people first attributes, and in many cases, they are the ones that are the company formally conveys in terms of this is our culture, this is what we believe in. And different companies have different attributes, different versions, but these are all, again, very people first, people centric. Because in many cases, it does come down to, attraction and retention. Many folks these days, regardless of what generation you come from, you want to work for a company that's going to allow you to be your awesome full self.
Yeah.
That's great. Does that mean big salaries for me and I'm going to get promoted every 6 months? Well, no, probably not. But it's going to give you that full satisfaction as a human as well as a worker. So I think those are some attributes that are really important.
I love the way you correlate it with the actual values of the company. Otherwise, it becomes quite a fake set of even leadership if it won't align with the fundamental values what everyone stands for. So thanks for walking us through that. Next question is like, what's a failure or even risk in your career that ended up being an important lesson for you? Could you mention an example? What's a failure or a risk in your career that ended up being an important lesson for you?
Oh boy! Oh boy! Oh boy! Oh boy! That's a great question. An example that I have is I spent some time at Google, which is such a great experience. And, you know, one wonderful attribute about the Google culture, it's very, data centric, which is great, obviously. One thing that I think I dropped the bomb on when I first started to work at Google was I had to become this data centric animal, this data geek. It's kind of like I have to know all that stuff, from the right algorithms to the right aspects of the budget to really kind of convey. I think I overdid it. Where I wanted to play this data card to show people how smart I was so quickly, versus no, data is just a tool to really drive relevance or accuracy for XYZ need. But you don't have to come across as like this data policing fella. And I think that's one thing that I learned. And it wasn't about data per se. It was just a good lesson in the sense of it's important just to be yourself. And if you do need to understand new aspects of this company, such as data, which everyone should have some sort of passion or interest in, I get it. But it's not as if you have to go out of your way and every other sentence has some sort of, data figure related to, don't you know the percentage of this is blah, 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 or don't you know that if this quota was attained, whatever. I think that's one thing that I really learned was data is important, but it's not as if you are the data. It's not as if it should run your personality. So that was, I think, a good lesson for me.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to overdo all those elements and new practices. Like I've been in many similar situations as well. So thanks for sharing that. Another one, you mentored and led many teams. What advice would you give to rising leaders who want to make an impact?
With their teams?
Yeah,
or
exactly.
for their teams?
For rising leaders, eventually, for people who want to take on more ownership and lead learning teams as you did in the past.
Yeah, it's a good question, particularly since there's a lot of fascination on these new approaches. What's a new approach? You need to be an empathetic leader, or you need to really put yourself in the shoes of each teammate. And it's beyond situational leadership. You have to really, really know the individual personally and so forth. I mean, that's all very, very important. And I think it's all very crucial related to leading teams. And it's not just leading L&D teams. It could be leading a finance team or a sales team. You do need to be empathetic. And I think you do need to find ways to understand where, John is coming from on that day compared to Jerry or Jane on the same day. People are coming in to their roles with different situations, different scenarios, different occurrences in their lives. And I think if you're properly empathetic, then you'll be able to, I think, understand where that person's coming from. And if you understand where that person's coming from, and ideally putting yourself in their shoes, for lack of better words, then I think you're going to be able to really position their success a lot more robustly and ideally a lot faster, because you know where they're coming from. You know what their career interests are. You know where their skill deficits might be. And then the other thing, too, is, I think there's a lot of focus these days on being available. That should not be anything new, but I think it's just getting a lot of, necessary and good traction. Not hype. Hype has kind of negative connotations. The last thing is, and this is definitely for a modern leader, I think, it's understanding the nuances related to this word attention. We live in a society now, whether it's social media or just whatever, where we're lacking attention. We're lacking focus. And I think wherever good leaders, good managers, good buddies, good peers can help the other person remove whatever is getting in the way of proper attention by having a very, very, active listening conversation, and it's not as if you have to prove yourself by sharing with the other individual or individuals how smart you are. I think it's understanding the value of just, being fully attentive and being, grasping what's happening right now, having that right mindset. I think it's really, really important. Then if you can figure out a way to scale that, if you have a team in the dozens or a team in the hundreds or teams in the thousands, it shouldn't matter. You should still have those same behaviors regardless. And if that does take off well, particularly if you're leading really large teams and you're managing the managers of these large teams, those attributes will also be conveyed by your fellow people managers as well, ideally. But if you do it with sincerity and authenticity and consistency, I think it will happen.
I think that's that's fascinating learning, and ties really well to my final question, which is about, like, we've been talking a lot about scalability of learning and developing scalable programs. You kept repeating how important the human factor, the human element is. So how do you balance these two? Because the more we use AI, the more we build scalable systems, possibly the less human the system will become. So how do you balance these two, like the personalization and the human aspect and the scalability powered by technology?
Oh boy, there's a lot of focus on this whole term, augmentation, augmented work. How does AI, the machine, the engine, how does it modify itself to work with humans? And then the other way around. How do humans modify themselves to work better with an agent or with a large language model, whatever it might be? I think society is still trying to figure that out. It's in this augmented space, as people are calling it. Where can mutual success be obtained if the human understands, to your prior question? So that's how you operate as an agent. You're not like a super advanced agent where you run in a very, very smart augmented way where you can make your own decisions and you learn from your prior work or your prior mistakes. You're an agent that's just very task specific. You're just building this to this. And I'm not dehumanizing things. I think dehumanizing agents is in itself a little bit of a dichotomy. But I think it's just, I think there's something there where you're still trying to figure something out. The real benefit is, how does this combined intelligence, human and AI, or human and agents, when you combine them, are you getting something really special and unique that didn't exist before? And that's where I think we're headed, because there's a lot of discoveries and discovering that's still occurring related to what is our relationship with AI. And this is more than, AI being this fully, magnificent machine that's going to, take over all the smart humans in the world. I don't know. I'm definitely not in that more negative slant. I think this condition, this stuff in between, I don't know what to call it. Where can AI and humans be magnificent together? That is a total, greenfield, blue ocean territory in terms of, I don't know if anybody has it figured out. There was a great article that came out last summer, 2024, about, does AI, can it affect the emotions of humans, like a good coach or a good psychologist or a good doctor? And I think it was a Stanford study, and it was basically, it can coach and mentor you in certain ways where you can actually change your emotive state.
See more and more of these therapist use cases.
Exactly. And I think they're really fascinating because do you want to turn that off? Do you want to say that the agent, that AI, is doing this manipulative thing? Well, these are all very, structured scientific ventures, in the sense of, no, I'm just trying to find a faster, better, more effective way to make sure that Mark is not going to be this depressed guy all the time, or that Mark is always focused on, getting to point better, getting to his points faster or better. I don't know, might be. But I think that's just really fascinating because that was like a net new thing that I don't think people thought about, 2.5 years ago, or even in the old machine learning days. And again, there's this space that I think is just so fascinating in the terms of how can we be the best collective intelligence and get the most spectacular things out of each other because we are together. And there's something there, something profound, but that really, really interests me.
Yeah. So it does on my end, like fascinating how it actually can, get emotions out of you. Like I've been trying so many of these like use cases over the weekends, like for fun and all that. And, there are many like unexplored areas of these agentic use cases, but where it just really like formulates like an opinion, like a persona, and you can talk to it and engage in a really immersive experience. There's something fascinating about it, primarily if you use it for developing your skills and all that, or even psychologically it helps you.
Yeah, just to add, there's this whole aspect related to, is AI creative? And for some time, like 2023, 2024, for some time it was not, no. I mean, it'll act in a creative way because you told it to respond in certain unique ways. I don't know. The more I play around with name your large language model, and I ask it not deceiving questions, but I'm just going to ask it something really challenging, something from left field. And, so if Walt Disney was alive today and he met Steve Jobs when Steve Jobs was just in junior college in Silicon Valley, how would Steve Jobs impact the Tomorrowland rides at Disneyland in Anaheim, California? But only between 1963 and 1964. I mean, if you ask it really kind of bizarre, far out stuff, assuming that's bizarre or far out, it's going to come back with something really, really unique. And I think so getting back to is AI creative? Heck yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, is the mechanism to get there creative, literally creative, from scratch, artistic? I'm not sure, but wow.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see so many creative responses that are so spot on that I would never, ever, ever, ever consider. So yeah, again, that's in that middle area.
Exactly. Love that example, Mark. Thanks so much for mentioning that. I think we reached the end, so just wanted to really appreciate your attendance, like the fact that you came all the way here, and really appreciate sharing the thoughts. I learned a lot from you today. Hopefully the audience did as well. So thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very happy to come back, and it's been an exciting discussion. So thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks everyone for listening in. It was a fantastic discussion about AI-first learning systems and learning a bit more about Marc's background and learnings in his career. If you want to listen to more sessions like this, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Spotify or on some of our other relevant channels such as LinkedIn. Thank you so much for today. Much appreciated.